Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna.
Hare Krishna and welcome to the Vaishnava Voices podcast. My name is Sitapati Das.
And my name is Dana Devi.
Vaishnava Voices podcast is coming to you from a small rural town in the North Island of New Zealand, where we live on a lifestyle block of 5 acres with 4 cows, 24 chickens, and 2 cats. We also have a daughter, 15, who lives with us, and our son, 21, is starting his adult life in Australia.
Lucky for some. You may be wondering where I'm from. I am from Peru. At home, we speak Spanish, and it's exciting to speak my own language.
I learned to speak Spanish in 2001 to 2004 when I lived in Lima, Peru, doing service in the BBT and in ISKCON temples. The Vaishnava Voices podcast is created inside a commitment to the possibility of connecting Vaishnavas from around the world, sharing knowledge, information, perspective, and wisdom, and transforming the conversational environment that we live in.
Life is real, and let's share what's happening in our world. And let's make a life exciting, because it doesn't need to be boring.
We'd love to have you come on the show to share your experience, perspective, knowledge, and wisdom. So reach out and start a conversation with us. Feel free to do it anytime. And enjoy today's episode.
Looking forward to talk to you.
Hare Kṛṣṇa.
Jai Shri Ram.
Welcome to the episode today. Munching on a Mandarin. Parambi Jayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. Total World Victory of Hare Kṛṣṇa. 2034. I'm Siddhapati Das.
And Devi.
And today we're starting a conversation about how to powerfully participate in a cult. And we're broadcasting from our lounge room this time instead of our office, which is why you kind of see half of our green screen background and then the other half of our actual wall with a picture of the Panchatattva here. How to participate powerfully in a cult. So yeah, I wanted to talk about a few different kind of cults today.
Well, first we have to talk about what's actually a cult.
We're going to talk about that for sure. Where to begin this conversation? I mean, I got sparked onto this by a couple of things. There's been a lot of videos from people who've been participating at Landmark, and a new book that's come out. Is this a cult? Is it a cult? Let me find that book here so we can show it on the screen. Is this a cult? Here's the website. I'm gonna do a screen share. Let's see. Here we go. So let's do screen share, present. So we were reading two books at the same time. Two books at the same time. One about, so this book here, Is This a Cult, by Ann L. Peterson. She was a wisdom course leader, participated in Landmark's programs, not participated in the programs, but as a leader and a staff member for like 20 plus years. And then the other book that we're reading kind of simultaneously is this book, Beyond Institutional Gurus, Initiations, and Party Men, by Kailash Chandra Das. Now, he was the editor of the original conspiracy book in ISKCON, The Guru Business, by Srila.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, from the 80s. Srila didn't kill himself. Srila, of course, was murdered, yeah. And he was murdered because he was blowing the whistle on the cult in ISKCON. That ISKCON had become a cult. So anyway, we're going to be talking about cults. Is this a cult? What is a cult? That's a good place to start with what is a cult. But first of all, I want to establish one thing.
What?
ISKCON is a cult. From Srila Prabhupada's own words, when people say, like, is Hare Kṛṣṇa a cult? Unless you're going to contradict Prabhupada and say Prabhupada is, I denounce Prabhupada's words, you have to say, yes, it is a cult. I'm going to link these two things together. One time someone said to Prahlad, our son, is Landmark a cult? Or someone was saying something about a cult, right? And in the frequently asked questions about Landmark, it's like, no, it's not a cult. Here are the reasons why it's not a cult. It doesn't have a charismatic leader. Cults take people away from their families. Landmark brings families together. And we're going to talk more about like what is a cult and what is not a cult. 108 pesos.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is what Prahlad said, which was really funny. He said, Landmark's not a cult. Hare Krishna's a cult, And like when I've been talking to people, I might be talking to them about Landmark. I'll say, look, man, if you want a cult, I'm a Hare Kṛṣṇa. That's a cult. So we're flat about that. And one more anecdote about that. So it was 2014, 15, somewhere around there. Let me how do I get the screen off? Remove. We're at the Landmark Center in Brisbane. And for those who don't know, Landmark is like a personal professional development education company. Does courses. So we're at the Landmark Center in Brisbane. Jai Vijay, the temple president, is there. He's been in an introduction. Mahamantra was in a seminar at the time and, had invited him to come check it out. And so Jai Vijay had registered. He's going to do the Landmark Forum. And somehow the three of us are in the room. The introduction leader's there, and something about a cult comes up. And so the introduction leader is having the reaction like, no, this is not a cult, and starts to go into the whole spiel. And then we just go, look, man, we're Hare Krishnas. We've got no problem with a cult, man. And then we're already in a cult. And then Mahamantra says, all the best organizations are cults.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, back to that Hare Krishna is a cult. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cult. What is his cult? Sex cult, that's a different one. In every town, city, village of the word, his cult will be preached. What is his cult? Because Vaishnava cult means past Brahmanism, so beyond Brahmanism. So what is Chaitanya cult? Chaitanya cult means realization of Kṛṣṇa. This is Chaitanya cult. This is Chaitanya cult. My fathers and forefathers, they all belong to this cult, Kṛṣṇa cult. So naturally from our childhood, we were trained up in this cult. The Bhagavat cult is preached also through the art of music and dance, as it was done by Lord Chaitanya. The Christian missionary people are backed by huge resources, and they preach the Christian cult all over. The devotees of Lord Kṛṣṇa may also combine together to start the mission of preaching Bhagavatam cult. It is necessary to preach cult for saving the people. The Christian cult, or any other cult, cannot save the people from being under the clutches of the growing lots. Look. The scriptures of the Buddhist cult are chiefly based on argument and logic, and they contain 9 chief. Okay, stretches there. There's actually a direct translation in the Bhagavatam, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila. Let's go to that. I think it's on the next page. We belong to the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cult. There's no way, if someone says to you, is this a cult? You can't say it's not a cult without directly contradicting Srila Prabhupada's direct statements. He is preaching the Bhakti cult. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu established the devotional cult everywhere. No one could defeat him, right? Mm-hmm. And then in this letter here, the Christian cult or any other cult cannot save the people from being under the clutches of the growing communism, but the Bhagavatam cult can save them because of its philosophical and scientific approach. We're going to come back to this because this is like very important to what's going on in the world. Yeah. But first of all, what does it mean, a cult? What does this thing cult mean? Now, someone could say at this point that, well, when Srila Prabhupada says cult, he doesn't mean what most people mean today when they say cult. And they're going to say, because the meaning of the word has changed, right? And so what you have to do there is you have to introduce a complicated linguistic theory to say that what Srila Prabhupada really means is the meaning of the words has changed. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, that's what the people do in the Hare Krishna.
You might need to speak up because we don't have the powerful microphone.
Yeah.
That we normally do. Normally we have that big microphone hanging here, but we're just using the microphone in the computer. Yeah. Crank it up.
It's kind of common thing that I hear about the Hare Krishnas.
What's that?
Like Srila Prabhupada said this. No, he didn't mean that. He meant this. It's like,
Yeah, exactly.
But when you read the books, one of the things now that we're talking about this, I noticed that when I was in Bhakti Lounge, the talkers like, oh, is this like a cult? The people say, no, this is not a cult. And then when I was reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, it says like, this is a cult. It's like, oh, but they said it's a cult. So I guess clarifying exactly what it means cult.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, I think, have the idea of a cult being like, where sacrifices and weird things happening, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so, okay, yep.
That has a significance because this is part of a cult as well. And you know, like we're in different cults, we're just not aware of it.
Yeah, we're gonna build this. We're gonna build
Okay,
this.
YouTube
This
thing.
is not gonna. We're not gonna just like drop the whole thing. And I'll try to walk you through the whole picture of this. So in those videos of staff members from Landmark, and the book, Is This a Cult? So I'm going to bring this back up, right? Add to stage. So if we go to this book here, Is This a Cult? Confronting the line between transformation and exploitation. So people are now in these videos, they're going like, I did the Landmark programs, but it's actually like, it's a cult. Like, and then they step through like what distinguish making it a cult, you know, this kind of like indoctrination. Let me find this other book actually. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to look up this other book here. It's a book called Structure of Organizations. Structure of Organizations. I think it's by Eric Berne. Yeah, this one here. Eric Berne, his name is. So this guy, Eric Berne, is famous for transactional analysis. But he wrote this book called Structure and Dynamics of Organizations and Groups. And I read this back in the day. Games People Play, that's another one of his books. He states his objective with this book as to offer a systematic framework for the therapy of ailing groups and organizations. In this book, Berne discusses the structure and dynamics of groups, classifications of groups, the analysis of transactions, an overview of games, group psychotherapy, and other subjects. He doesn't treat games in great detail. That would come next year in Games People Play. This book is recommended for those interested in an introduction to the application of transactional analysis to groups. This is a very interesting book.
Okay.
Yeah, about the structure and dynamics of organizations and groups. So what these people who are coming out of being staff members is they're doing like a retrospective analysis of the, you know, the structure and the dynamic of the organization and the group that they're in. So it does bear a lot of their framing in the conversation they're having. It bears a lot of resemblance to people who are like, why I left the Hare Krishnas, right? That's another kind of famous kind of conversation. Let's see if we can find a why I left the Hare Krishnas. Let's see if we can find what's the top hit for that one on DuckDuckGo. Here we go. Ask Me Anything, former Hare Krishna cult recruiter. That's pretty cool. How I Once Was a Hare Krishna. 13 years after leaving. Let's try this on YouTube. So I'm grabbing a couple of articles that we can look at here. And then YouTube, search on here, why I left the Hare Krishnas. Yeah, okay, so if we go back to StreamYard and then bring it onto the stage. So this is the famous one, My Life with the Hare Krishnas and Why I Left. Secrets of the Hare Krishnas Exposed, Why I Left. How I Once Was a Hare Krishna, I've blooped. So what happens with these things is people retroactively reanalyze their participation. And what they say when they leave typically is they say, oh, you know, I was brainwashed and I was in a cult and I didn't realize it, right? Mm-hmm. So it typically looks like this. They join the Hare Krishnas. People around them say, that's a cult. And then they say, no, this is not a cult. And then at some point in the future, they leave and they say, it's a cult. And I didn't realize that it was a cult. I was brainwashed, right? And the people who are coming out of Landmark, their experience and framing and everything looks very similar. And so I was looking at that, and you know, I've analyzed like I've been a Hare Krishna for like 20, well, I don't know what it is now, 26 years, 27 years. And so a lot of people have come and gone in that time, and I've analyzed all of their, you know, exit kind of things. The thing that I always look at that when they're saying that, like, I was a Hare Krishna and I was brainwashed and I didn't know it. And now I realize that I was brainwashed. And so before, when I was a brainwashed Hare Krishna cult member, I didn't realize that I was a brainwashed Hare Krishna cult member, right? So the person is making a statement that, like, my psychological subjective analysis or assessment of my psychological state and the reality of the situation I'm in is unreliable. Like, when you are a brainwashed cult member, you don't realize that you're a brainwashed cult member, right? So I'm going to link that back to a distinction from the Landmark Forum, which is superstition. So a superstition is only a superstition when it's not a superstition. And when it is a superstition, it's not a superstition. That's a conversation, I think, on day 2 of the forum. Probably day 2 of the forum.
Something, yeah.
Day 1 or 2. And
No, I
people
think
are like,
day 1.
it's on day 1?
Day 1,
Okay,
yeah.
so it's like, people are like, well, what does that mean? Like, it's kind of like, because the structure of the Landmark Forum, it's like, it's a combination between a Socratic dialogue, group coaching, large group awareness training, and like Zen Buddhism with a koan. So that's a koan. You know, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping, right? I'm not going to give you the answer to that. If you want the answer to that, do the Landmark Forum. You actually get the answer to what is the sound of one hand clapping. Not just like, you know, it's this, not just like as a, you know, a joke, but as like an actual realization of the koan. I think the Landmark Forum is an amazing product.
It is, yeah.
But let's look at this koan. A superstition is only a superstition when it is not a superstition, and when it is a superstition, it is not a superstition. Like, even to parse that, most people, you know, you do a whole inquiry into that in there. But I'm just going to give you the answer to this one. No, because I'm going to extend it into being a brainwashed cult member. So if I spill salt on the table, and I'm like, you know, there's a superstition that if you spill salt, you have to take some of the salt and throw it over your shoulder. Otherwise, you get bad luck. Yeah. Everybody knows that's a superstition. Or like, if a black cat crosses your path, and you're gonna have bad luck. Everybody knows that that's a superstition. So that's not really a superstition, because you know it's a superstition. So it's just like a funky kind of thing, right? The real superstition is the one where people really believe it, and they're like, that's not a superstition, that's real. Those are real superstitions. Like, when we talk about like the primitive tribe of superstitious people, they don't think that the things that they believe are superstitions. They think they're real.
Yeah.
And so we say that that's superstition, man. But they're like, no, this is real. Same thing like when they say that you're in a cult, and you say, no, I'm not in a cult. That's a brainwashed cult member.
Like the Darwinism, you know, the human beings came from the monkey.
Well, that's the
evolution of the human beings are the evolution of monkeys. Like,
yeah, it's a belief. It's a religious belief. It's like a mythological origin narrative about humanity, and people believe that. So we're going to get into that, because that's actually a cult belief.
Yeah, but you know what? How that became, like, people believe, you know, this is real. People think that's real when I'm not, in fact.
Yeah,
I don't see any monkey.
Yeah, well, even if you took it like, because they'll say, no, that's science. No, science means that it's a theory, and we use it as like, it's a hypothesis, it's a theory. It's like, yeah, like, if we adopt that as an explanation, what are the implications of that, and what kind of predictions does it make, and what can it explain about the world? That's science. But to be like, this is the truth, dude, now you're a religious believer. You're now using that as a religious belief. And I'm going to make the case over this conversation that that's a religious belief of a cult that people are brainwashed into, and that they're not in a cult. They are brainwashed cult members.
Yeah.
So the person who's been the Hare Krishna or participated at Landmark and is now coming out and saying, I was brainwashed and I was in a cult. It's like, okay, but if you didn't understand that you were a brainwashed cult member before, how do you know that you're not a brainwashed cult member now? Because the person is saying, like, I discovered that my subjective assessment of myself and the environment that I'm in was unreliable. But now I'm not in a cult. It's like, hang on a second, dude. You just made the same mistake. You just said, I discovered that my subjective assessment of myself and what I was participating in was unreliable, but now it is reliable. But you just discovered that it's unreliable.
Exactly.
You should be in an existential state of like, how do I know what's actually happening? That was where I was before this whole conversation.
Yeah, but like when you say, how do I know?
Mhm.
What was the question you said? How do the self-question?
Your self-assessment
The
and your
self-assessment.
assessment of the environment that you're in.
Like, how do I know that this my subjective assessment is real?
Is accurate.
It's accurate.
Yeah.
Well, it will never be accurate.
There is actually one way it can be accurate.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, if you think at that moment that your assessment is accurate, and then later on the time passes and then it's actually not accurate.
Yeah, most likely what will happen is that again in the future you will go, oh, I thought I understood then, but now I don't. At a certain point of growing up, you do realize that. You look back and you have enough history that you go, I've abandoned pretty much all of the different positions that I've had as I've matured. And so you develop a relationship with the positions that you have now that in the future, I'm going to abandon this position. I'm going to extend it. I'm going to discover that some things about it were incorrect. So you develop what Brian Forte, one of my mentors at Red Hat, said, strong opinions loosely held. Like, yeah, I'll present this thing, but, in the future, I'll, like this for me is a new discovery itself. And then there'll be another discovery further in the future, but I'll present this one like strongly now.
Okay.
Yeah. So you are not in a cult. If you are that you are in a cult. And when you are that you're not in a cult, you're in a cult and you're brainwashed. So those people have gone, what's happened to them is they've gone, I was in a cult. Like, you see, Prahlad and I and Prabhupada have no problem, and Mahamantra and Jai Vijay have no problem saying, yeah, we're in a cult. We're a cult. We're the Kṛṣṇa cult. We're Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cult. We're in a cult. I'm never gonna do a video saying why I left the Hare Krishnas and realized it was a cult, because it's just like, it's right here. This is a cult. We're in a cult. Hare Krishna is a cult. The Vaishnava cult, the cult of Vaishnavism. It's a cult. There's nothing unclear about it. It's a cult. We're in a cult. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cult. What is his cult? Krishna Prem. Prabhupada's like, my father and my forefathers, they all belong to this cult, Krishna cult. So naturally from our childhood, we're chained up in this cult.
And that is true. When he says like trained from childhood, like, schools these days, children are basically indoctrinated. So that means it's a cult.
Yeah, well, I assert that it's impossible for human beings to not be in a cult. So here's what I want to look at here is this point where people say that, well, it doesn't mean what people think that it means. Prabhupada is using the word in a different sense. Okay, the conspiracy theory. So conspiracy theory itself means a theory about a conspiracy, which means two or more people working together in a hidden way to advance their interests. Conspiracies happen all the time. Two or more people collaborating together to advance their interests. Conspiracies are like if we go back to that Eric Berne book, Structure and Dynamics of Organizations and Groups, Transactional Analysis, Games People Play. Conspiracy is a basic distinction of organization. It's like all warfare is deception by Sun Tzu and Art of War. Conspiracy is just a basic fundamental fact of life. Conspiracy. Conspiración, it comes from, it means to breathe together, like respiration. Con meaning with, spiration to breathe. Conspiration, they're whispering together, they're breathing together, they're in a small room conspiring. But the word conspiracy theory was, of course, demonized by the CIA as a psychological operation to stop people from putting forward theories about how JFK was assassinated by more than one person.
Mhm.
Like the lone gunman was the outcome of the Warren report. It was just a crazy lone gunman who did it. There's nothing more to it than that. You know, the president of the sitting president of the United States is assassinated in office. And it's like, there's nothing to see here. There's no political or structural reason for this. It was just a crazy guy. And then people are like, but even that the physical evidence supports that there's more than one person involved in the actual shooting. What to speak of the organization of it and the motivation of it?
Mhm.
Like, whose interests are being advanced here? And so they demonized the word conspiracy theory to make it impossible for you to talk about or to consider those kind of things, right? So conspiracy theory was demonized in order to make it impossible for people to analyze anything in that space. Now, I assert that the word cult has undergone the same psychological operation. The word cult is now a pejorative term, and it's a like you say, oh, that's a cult. Okay, now here's my thesis, my statement, my assertion, my hypothesis. This is being done because for human beings, it's not possible to not be in a cult. A human being is always in a cult. So when the people at Landmark go, I discovered I was in a cult, it's like, no kidding, man. The only choice you have as a human being is you get to choose what cults you are in. You don't have the option of not being in a cult unless you go into the woods and live by yourself. In that case, you could not be in a cult.
Well, even though that even that is a cult, because you live in a life of your own, what do you call, belief,
Mhm.
and you so attached to that belief that you think is real, or you make it look is real. Even that is a cult, because you just like immerse in that.
Okay.
You're doing the same thing because you have this belief that I have to do this and I have to live in this way because, when I do this, I am looking after the nature, or I am with this, or I am with that, whatever is the thought behind it.
Okay. Look, I for me, I was like, the idea that you go into the Himalayas or something, like these ascetic sages, are they sannyasis? So my thinking there was that would be the only situation I could see where a human being could not be in a cult. Otherwise, you're going to be in a cult. I talked to Muchukunda about this the other day, and he said, yeah, even a family is a cult.
Yeah, it is.
The father is a cult leader. The others follow the cult
the mother's
leader.
a cult leader. Like, we have a culture
Yeah,
now.
you can be a cult leader as well.
I am already. Thank you. In case you didn't notice that, Mr. Cult Leader. In a family, there is a culture in that.
Mhm.
It is like it has to be done this way and it has to go this way, blah, blah. So the children grow up with that, right?
Mhm.
So it's like that belief system in that.
Yeah.
I find it called.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go back to Srila Prabhupada's statement here. It's just so powerful. My father and my forefathers, they all belong to this cult, Kṛṣṇa cult. So naturally, from our childhood, we were trained up in this cult.
Yeah, even with the Himalayas one, when you give in the example, now this ascetic going to the Himalayas and they are, concentrating on God. It's a God cult, because they have this belief and this connection that this is what the way it is.
Mhm.
It's a cult.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's my opinion. But
Sure.
anyways,
So
I'm
yeah,
sure people can have their own.
well, I was
way
like,
of-
that's an exception, but maybe that's not an exception. But it just makes my point stronger, which is my assertion is for human beings, it's impossible to not be in a cult. So people who are like, I left the cult, the Hare Krishna cult, it's like, you didn't leave the Hare, now I'm not in a cult. You just switched to a different cult. You were brainwashed before into thinking you were not in a cult. Now all you've done is joined another cult, and you're now a brainwashed member of that cult, that you're not in a cult. You're in a cult. There's no avoiding it. You're always in a cult. That's why the title of this episode is How to Powerfully Participate in a Cult. Because when you are that you're not in a cult, you have no power in your participation.
Yeah, one of the things about all of these people, what I live and the book of this lady, It is just the human tendency to get into things, and we're choosing to go into things, but we're not really aware what we're choosing to get into it. And we don't have this, like, what do you call this? This, I guess, the potency to see what you're getting yourself into, because we just like taking actions, and constantly in the move without stopping and saying, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And where am I going with all of this? We don't have like that stop, that pause when we think and analyze things, and then we go forward. We may have like some flickering thoughts about this and, all of that, but we don't have that stop to the point, like, when something is very exciting for human beings and everybody else is doing that and people are just like so excited or elated about it, then it's where it produces more of like this stamina, this energy to get into that, right? And then you keep going and you keep going year and year and year, because there is something enjoyable about it that you are just basically carry on with that. It's taking you years and months and whatever. And then when something happens, when you notice that something in you is missing, or you could be having something else in there that you don't have right now, you look back and it's like, oh my gosh, I did not know that this actually is a cult. So you have like the time to look back, and you pause in that, you start looking and analyzing your life.
Yeah. But part of the reason why people are like, this is a tough one for me I'm still just grappling with this articulation of it. People have been brainwashed into thinking that they're not in a cult. That's the biggest, this is the crux of the issue. There's a psychological operation to brainwash people into thinking that they're not in a cult. People today believe that I'm not in a cult. And so when they discover I'm in a cult, but then they think I've left the cult. No, you've been brainwashed into thinking that human beings can exist not in a cult. That's being done by the world's dominant cult right now.
Yeah.
And so previously people understood that they had to be in some kind of cult, and the world was filled with cults, and it was a question of which cult did you belong to? Do you belong to this cult or that cult? And everybody understood that all human beings are in cults, and it was just a matter of which cult you were in. But what's happened is a cult has brainwashed people, and it's brainwashed them into believing that they're not in a cult. So every single person in the world is in a cult, and when you have a look into what this cult actually is that you're in, and the brainwashing is to make it impossible for you to analyze the cult that you're in, and also to eliminate opposing cults by calling them cults, whereas this is not a cult. You're in the Hare Kṛṣṇa cult, you're in Landmark, you found out it was a cult, now you've left, now you're not in a cult, you've just gone back to the cult with the biggest brainwashing power.
Yeah, that is true. Like, even if you get yourself out of the Hare Kṛṣṇa cult, where basically is how to live a life that is, in harmony with every living entity, and then you have the Landmark organization where they say, you know what, this is not a cult and so, but there they teach you how to be present to your mind, and that your mind is not in control, but you have like more awareness of your mind and how to control your mind, right? And this is how it's like the way they indoctrinate you, right? They educate you as well. Now, I say, I don't want to be participant of those cults, and you go into the wider world where everybody else is doing whatever they want. Actually, that's also a cult.
Doing whatever they want. Yeah.
You can drink, you can do whatever you want, and that's not a cult. In fact, you're in a bigger cult.
Yeah, you are in a cult. You can't, because this is the point. This is the central point. For a human being, it's impossible to not be in a cult. And when you are not in a cult, you're a brainwashed cult member. So when people see their son, daughter joins the Hare Krishnas, and they're like, that's a cult. And then their son or daughter is like, no, it's not a cult. It's like, you're brainwashed, buddy. It's a cult. My son, just like Srila Prabhupada, he's like, my father and my forefathers, they all belong to this cult, Kṛṣṇa cult. So naturally from our childhood, we were trained up in this cult. Now, Prahlad can just say that straight up. He'll say, oh yeah, Hare Krishna is a cult. I can say that. It's a cult. We're flat. It's a cult. There's no problem. And then other people will say, well, no, it's not a cult. And it's like, you're contradicting Srila Prabhupada. And then they'll say, well, no, it means something other than what he said. It's like, we don't care what he meant. We only care what he said. It's a cult, man. We're in a cult. When someone is like, no, it's not a cult, they are either lying or deceived. So when people are saying like, I'm not in a cult, they're brainwashed. When the leaders are telling you this is not a cult, they're lying either by being themselves deceived and not understanding what's happening, or it's either, you know, deliberately or through themselves being brainwashed into it. Everything's a cult. I went to a Bikram yoga class in like 2010 or something, 2009, and I was like, man, this is a cross between a gym and a cult. I love it. This is great. It was obviously a cult. All the best organizations are. So there's this main brainwashing cult, and part of its brainwashing is that human beings can exist outside cults. You cannot be in a cult. That is the brainwashing of the cult. That's how it works. They've brainwashed you into thinking that you can not be in a cult. And when people come into Kṛṣṇa consciousness, because they've been previously, like Prahlad has not been brainwashed into that. But when you come into Kṛṣṇa consciousness, you've been brainwashed by the cult that you're coming in from into believing that you cannot be in a cult. And so when people say this is a cult, you're like, oh, no, this isn't a cult. You have to say that because part of the brainwashing of the other cult is that anything that is not our cult is a cult, and our cult is not a cult. And that's the brainwashing. Being brainwashed into it.
Not only that, it's like a denial that actually they are a cult.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. The denial that it's a cult is the brainwashing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people come into the Kṛṣṇa cult, or they come into Landmark or Bikram, and they go, no, this is not a cult, because they've been programmed to stay in the original cult by the idea that being in a cult is bad and wrong. Mm-hmm. Whereas being in a cult is inevitable for a human being. Mm-hmm. Inevitable means it cannot be avoided. You are always in a cult. And when you are that you are not in a cult, you're brainwashed. So when these people went into Kṛṣṇa consciousness and were like, no, this isn't a cult, and then later on they come out and they go, it's a cult, but now I'm out of the cult. It's like, brother, you're brainwashed, man. You're always in a cult. You can't avoid it. Mm-hmm. This letter to Sumati Murarji here is really important. Let's find it in here. Is it this letter or is it another letter? Okay, there might be another letter. Not there at all. It's the only remedy for raising the people in the world. Was it that one? Present moment. It's a letter to Sumati Murarji. It's either that one. Okay, so it's either this one or one on the previous page. Or maybe it's, you know how so there was a mention of deprogrammers there, right? Cult deprogrammers. So that was a big thing in the 70s and the 80s, right? The cult deprogrammers.
I think they still exist, that one, you know, like when people are like, mostly in the psychotherapy department, people that has been,
I've got it here,
abuse and torture or whatever, and they're called, they come out with a lot of mental issues, and then they have to be deprogrammed.
Well, no, here's the thing about that. This is actually a misnomer. This idea of cult deprogrammers, what they actually are is they're cult reprogrammers. They're reprogramming you into another cult. Once you understand that, you suddenly get an access to freedom, power, individuality, responsibility, self-expression, free thought, because you realize you're always in a cult. It's not that like I have to think what everyone, and you know, it's like, and then these people, they've just gone into like another cult without being responsible for that they're in a cult.
And that is the thing, you know, like that's not even taught in school that this is a cult. It's basically hidden from any sort of education.
It's become, but you know what's happening right now is the Great Awakening is that people are, oh look, there's some comments in here.
What does it say?
Hang on, I'll just make this point and then we'll go to the comments. People are waking up to that they're low-level members of a global satanic cult. Okay, so some things about the land. I'm going to string a bunch of things here together. People who have been on staff at Landmark are like, I worked 70 hours a week on minimum wage for 10, 20 years or whatever, and I was exploited. And so I would never go and do a Landmark program, even though I got so much value and have seen so much value from doing them, because I wouldn't support an organization that does that. And I was just like, you know what, man? I like using my Apple devices, and they're made by people, slaves, you know? And just because I like using my Apple device doesn't mean that I want to work in a sweatshop with a suicide net. So, yeah, okay, so people there, they're working, and they're doing 70 hours, on minimum wage, because they're doing a bunch of like volunteering and on top of that, even more sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing about that is that's actually their choice. None of those people have been kidnapped and put in chains. They've all chosen to do that. They all voluntarily sign up, and they continue to show up every day voluntarily to do that. And it's only later that they turn around and say, well, I was exploited. And you find the same thing in the Hare Krishna movement, that people say, I gave so many years of my life and did this and that, and and now they're upset about something. And then there are other people who continue to do it without complaining about it because they still enjoy it, right? And all of those people are in a cult. They're all in a cult, including the people in the sweatshop making the phones. They're also in a cult.
Mm.
And there's also a difference between going to the Sunday feast and having some halava and doing a kirtan, or shaving your head and moving into the temple and surrendering everything and becoming like a full-time servant of the, whatever the temple authorities are telling you to do. So there's different levels of participation in the cult, but they're all cults, and it's all participation in a cult. And what people are coming to realize is they're waking up to, hang on a second, I'm a low-level member of a cult. I'm a low-level member of a global satanic cult. Like what I thought of as like, normal life turns out to be a kind of a quasi-religious organization with like a paramilitary, kind of organizational structure. You're participating in that. You go to your cult role every day and do your job, and then you go home at night and lock yourself into your own cell. You're like literally conditioned to be like, there's a person in the prison, and they have to do some kind of job or work during the day, and then they get locked in their cell at night. I realized this during the lockdowns, and like meditating on the 15-minute cities that they have planned for people and what life will look like in there, and contrasting that to what life looked like in the Americas before the Europeans arrived there. People just roaming in tents, roaming the plains, all that kind of stuff, complete sort of freedom there. Now people lock themselves into their cells at night and then unlock themselves out of their cell in the morning and go to do their labor during the day and then repeat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To the point that you say, like, people get to, choose every day. Mm-hmm. And that is true, like sometimes we're not like fully aware that we actually choosing. Even, going to the kitchen and making a cup of tea. It's a choice that you make. Mm-hmm. You're choosing it, right?
Yep.
And then we don't look back and say, oh my God, I made the wrong choice.
Yeah.
I've been brainwashed to drink tea. Like even drinking tea, somebody has to give you the idea, the belief that tea is really good for you or whatever. But anyways, we constantly are making that choice. Even to open our mouth and say a word is our choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So everything is basically a choice.
Yeah, this is the thing about it, is the point you're making is very powerful.
Being aware of it is completely different. But if you just like what do you call this one? Like an aware person, just going and going and going and going, just like getting yourself taken by life and whatever is in circumstances, and you're just like there. So not, being self-aware of what you're doing, what you're choosing is a different story.
You know what would be amazing is someone comes out with a video and they say, I was in the Kṛṣṇa cult or whatever cult, Landmark, whatever, Bikram, Apple, whatever it was. And now I'm leaving that cult and I'm joining this other cult. See, that's powerful because now you're being responsible. But it's like, I wasn't responsible for joining the Kṛṣṇa cult and now I'm leaving. And it's like, and I'm listening to you.
And you blame the culture or the cult that you get into yourself, and making your life miserable or whatever.
Yeah, because you're not being responsible for it.
Yeah, because you have chosen, not being responsible because you have chosen to be in there.
Yeah, but
for whatever reason.
Here's the point I'm making is when they do the video saying they're leaving that cult, I'm just listening to them, and what they're saying and not saying is, and now I'm joining this other cult, but I'm completely unaware that I'm joining a cult. And I'm not responsible for it at all. It's like, brother, you have to be responsible. You go, I'm leaving the Kṛṣṇa cult and I'm joining the global, satanic cult. Because when you analyze, if you just analyze what they're pumping out, it's satanic. Ultimately, and the low-level membership, so they're like, the Freemasons, they believe this and that. But the low-level Freemasons, when you get in, you don't understand that. Like when you go to like the Loft or some preaching center and they're like, no, this is not a cult, and you're just like peeling potatoes or whatever and doing some little thing, it's a cult, man. It's the Kṛṣṇa cult. They're saying it's not a cult, right? You go to the Hare Kṛṣṇa place and they say to you it's not a cult, and then if you just Google in here, Prabhupada's like, it's a cult. It's a cult. You're joining a cult, and there's nothing wrong with that because you just get to choose what cults you're joining. But the low-level members tell you it's not a cult, and they don't understand actually the cult dynamics of the whole thing. So these people, they're joining the low level of the satanic cult, and the low level of the satanic cult, it's marketing as secularism or atheism. So they tell you that you're joining secular society, and it's like predominantly atheistic, and they have like a bunch of these cult beliefs that they have, like, that the humans come from the monkeys and stuff like that, the moon landing is real, you've got to believe in the miracle of the moon landing, and you joined this cult at the low level. But then if you actually were like, I'm joining another cult now, let me have a look to see what this cult is, you'll find out that ultimately it's a satanic cult. What is called mainstream society, there's no neutral ground. Human beings are always in a cult. The biggest cult has brainwashed people into that it's not a cult and that human beings cannot be in a cult. And that's like the ultimate brainwashing. First, you have to tell them that human beings cannot be in a cult. And then you can tell them that you're not a cult. And then you can tell them that what this actually is this is secular. This is secularism. And it's atheism, and then ultimately they're not looking for it because they're not responsible that they're in a cult. They're in a satanic cult. And then what you do is you eliminate all the other cults by calling them cults. That's a cult. You don't want to be in a cult, do you? The only way you can not be in a cult is by being part of this cult, by being part of the neutral secular society, which is the entry level, ground level, like going to a Landmark program, like buying an Apple device doesn't put you in the factory with the suicide nets making the camera. Going to a Landmark program doesn't put you in staff doing 70, 80, 90 hours a week. Going to the temple or to the preaching center and eating some halava and chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa doesn't put you, in the 24-hour kirtan, doing 6 hours every day, day after day, living in the ashram, sleeping on the floor, which is a lot of fun. Recommend it. If it's right for you, this does not constitute cult membership advice. You have to decide whether this cult is right for you. But I'll tell you that straight up. Prabhupada will tell you straight up, this is a cult. They don't tell you that it's a cult. It's deception. They tell you that it's possible for a human being to not be in a cult, and this is not an occult. This is not a cult. If you don't want to be a cult, you have to be part of this cult. It's the ultimate brainwashing.
Mini cults.
And so what they've done to ISKCON is now, this is okay. I'm gonna throw these ones up. Database.io. I want to put these two things. Hang on. ISKCON UN internship. So if we go to database and we look for, let me bring it up on screen, search. If I go UN, barking dog, and then if we go here, internship launched to help develop ISKCON at the UN. So Srila Prabhupada says, not UN, it's United Nations. Barking dogs. He says United Nation rather than United Nations. So this is 77 Mayapur. Oh, he said it twice because he said it in Vrindavan as well. Okay, yeah. I first saw it in Melbourne, but then he's referred to it a number of times. So in Melbourne, he says United Nations and Association of Barking Dogs in an interview. And then they reported it. And then he goes on in Mayapur to say, I said in Melbourne, United Nations and Association of Barking Dogs. And then again in Vrindavan in 77, he says it again. I said that the United Nations Association of Barking Dogs, I said that, and they reported it. And then he laughs. That's Prabhupada in 77, right? Srila Prabhupada is just straight up. This is a cult. It's the Kṛṣṇa cult. Not only is this the Kṛṣṇa cult, but it's the only cult that can save people from this other growing communism cult, which is a satanic and atheistic communist cult, the cult of the Asuras. This is the only cult that can defeat that cult. And then all these people who are low-level members in the Assert cult, the Asuric satanic communist cult, have been brainwashed into believing that they're not in a cult while they're participating in it. And then in 2020, ISKCON is out here saying, is this the one? Okay, this is here. According to Gopal Leela, there are 3 primary reasons for ISKCON to connect with the UN. Number 1, to have a platform to showcase the society's work. Oh, look at how we're serving the cult. To engage with global decision makers on current issues like climate change, food security, poverty reduction, and human rights. Oh, we're participating in the cult, and how do we participate in the cult? To better understand the latest thinking and best practices on issues of the day, and to take these back to our ISKCON communities. You don't want to be in a cult? You don't want to be a cult? The only way you cannot be a cult is if you join this cult. They're assimilating it. This global cult works by brainwashing humans into believing that they cannot be in a cult, and then exterminating any competitors by saying they're a cult, or assimilating them into their own cult, which is not a cult. Which is not a cult. For example, in the current context of COVID-19, the World Health Organization, which is part of the UN system, is coordinating and tracking the development of the pandemic, Gopal says. Listen to them assimilating themselves into this cult. That's not a cult. We're not a cult. No, Kṛṣṇa is not a cult. UN's not a cult. There are no cults. You can exist not being in a cult, and you do it by joining this cult.
Bigger cult.
In the future, it would be great to have ISKCON staff in Geneva who are regularly getting the latest information from the WHO and relaying it back to our temples and communities. Then we would also relay ISKCON's best practices and the lessons we're learning from the pandemic back to the WHO. This is joining that into the cult. That's this book here, Beyond Institutional Gurus, Initiations, and Party Men, by Kailash Chandra Das, who is the editor of Sulochan's The Guru Business book. Sulochan didn't kill himself. Sulochan was killed because of writing that book. And this book here talks about the 3 transformations that ISKCON has undergone. It's going into the 4th transformation. The 4th transformation is full assimilation into this Asuric cult. It's Asuric atheism with Kṛṣṇa conscious characteristics is what it's become. The Christian cult or any other cult cannot save the people from being under the clutches of the growing communism, but the Bhaktivedanta cult can save them because of its philosophical and scientific approach. That's a statement of Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada back in the day is like, this is a cult. We're a cult. This one here is like people try to soften it by saying, like, Rajadam's left a comment. He says, so we're always in a cult or leaving one to join another. Fact. Cult means culture. So people like to try to soften it to culture because they've been brainwashed into believing that human beings cannot be in a cult and being in a cult is bad But what there is to confront is that human beings are always in a cult, and you're in a cult right now. And what is the nature of the cult that you are in?
Exactly.
But you've been brainwashed to not be able to think that,
Mm-hmm.
to not be able to examine the cult that you're in. Being in a cult is bad.
You know what?
Cults are bad.
People make it look like when people talk about like, oh, this cult is this way, this, you know, they minimize it, they criticize it, they judge everything, but they're not aware that actually where they are, or where they are, and where they're looking back to the or criticizing the other culture, they don't know or they don't see themselves that in that culture or in that cult.
Yeah.
So that is the thing, you know, like awareness, it's not present for people.
Cult definition and cult etymology. So my assertion is that the word cult has undergone the same psychological operation that conspiracy theory has.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theory is a bad term. Nobody wants to be associated with it because, and the reason they did that is because they don't want people to be able to analyze the actual conspiracies that are taking place. Now, the same thing with cult. Cult has been turned into a bad term, and they've invented this idea that you cannot be in a cult because they do not want people analyzing the cult that they're in. One of the side effects of that is that people have been brainwashed into that. They've taken the brainwashing of the global cult, that it's not a cult, that human beings cannot be in a cult. One of the side effects of that is human beings who believe that they cannot be in a cult will join an organization that is a cult because they're all cults and say, oh, this is not a cult. And then later on say, oh, it was a cult. It's like, brother, they're all cults. It's all cults. Human beings can only participate in cults.
Yeah, what surprised me is like the whole of this brainwashing happening since childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Starting at school and, you know, growing up, all of this media, all of that, and making them believe they're not in a cult.
Yeah, here we go.
Hating a cult.
Okay, let's have a look at this. So,
Sect.
where's my StreamYard? Too many things here. Don't open that. Oh, gosh. This. Okay, add to the stage. Here's the definition from American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, right? A religion or religious sect, generally considered to be extremist or false, with its followers often living in an unconventional manner under the guidance of an authoritarian charismatic leader. And then see number 3 here, this is the original one, a system or community of religious worship and ritual. It was widely understood by human beings that a human being could not have a religion. The idea of secularism, that a human being cannot participate in a community of religious worship and ritual, is brainwashing. It's the brainwashing of a satanic cult that uses that to hoover up all the people into it.
Yeah, into the bigger one.
Yeah, because this one here was the meaning. This one here at the beginning is the psychological operation meaning used to exterminate any other competitors.
Yeah. And one of the examples I can put here that just brings to my head is like, you know, when the Spanish people came with a religion to the Incas, and they wanted like forcefully convert them by killing them, by accepting by force into the bigger cult. And what was the reason behind it, you know? Control.
Yeah.
Yeah, power, control. So we see ourselves in this world now where we live in, like there is few amount of people that are in control of humanity, that they're doing all of these like crazy experimental things.
Dude, they're doing like full-blown occult rituals.
Yeah.
You know, like the 2012 Olympic Games opening, the opening of that tunnel in Switzerland. Like, yeah, it's just full-blown occultism.
It just that looks completely different than the religious rituals.
Yeah.
But they don't know that actually it's a ritual.
There's an argument in the Bhagavatam, it's in the commentary, Hridayananda Das Goswami, who argues for the cult uniform of the worldwide secular satanic cult, you know, in order to assimilate and be more relatable. but this was a great argument. He says that people argue that like, oh, you know, this kind of belief in God and religion and stuff, it's just like, you know, a psychological need, you know, that people have. And then he makes this argument. He says, we can see that human beings have needs. They need air, they need water, they need light. And we can see that the environment provides the things that they need. It provides air, light, water. So needs are corresponding to things that satisfy the needs. So therefore, if human beings have a need for belief in God, this indicates that God exists. The argument's not actually that strong because it actually indicates that belief in God exists. But it's a very powerful pointer because it means the idea that the secular human exists is not a fact. These people who think they are secular have been brainwashed into thinking they're secular. They're fully religious, but their religious belief and their religious practice is invisible to them.
Rejecting
No,
belief in God.
Yeah, they can't.
Like, for example, the atheists, you know, the religious belief of, you know, is they don't see it as a religion, but it's their God doesn't exist.
It's a belief. They
It's a
fully believe
yeah,
that.
It's a belief system. It's like, it's their religion.
Men came from monkeys. They got their creation myth. They got the whole thing. It all exploded out of nowhere, the quantum field. And they got like, it's like, what is that? That's just a bunch of words. Oh, but there's no predictions or, you know, it's an explanatory theory. Like if I believe that the world came out of the quantum field, what difference does that make? None. It's a belief. It does lead to like membership in a particular group and then normalization in that group. You know, what's happened over the last few years is it's become obvious to people, a lot of people, that they're low-level members of a satanic cult. You know, like a cult is a group which is typically led by a charismatic and self-appointed leader who tightly controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices. Now, this part here, which are considered deviant outside the norms of society. Now, that's when this naming of cult is used to eliminate any competitors to the cult. But let's take this first part. It's a group led by a charismatic, self-appointed leader who tightly controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices. How is that not the whole COVID madness with Fauci and Jacinda Ardern and others? Unwavering devotion, tightly controlling the members with a set of beliefs and practices. The people who went to Parliament in Wellington and, you know, protested against the mandates there and were like eating Kṛṣṇa prasadam and like fully, you know, just immersed in the whole thing. They were people who had rejected their membership in the satanic cult. Like what happened worldwide was like, you know, the story of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, right? I'm not going to do the conspiracy part. I'm just going to do the commonly accepted one, which is Jim Jones takes these people in his cult down to Guyana and then, you know, gets them all to drink Kool-Aid and kill themselves, 900 of them. Oh. The cult leader tells them all to drink Kool-Aid and they all drink it. I am going to do the conspiracy theory, but after this. So you know, basically Fauci, Ardern, you know, every single different cult leader in their cult leadership structure told all the members to just shoot yourself up with this thing, and all the cult members did it. And then a bunch of people went like, I'm not doing this, man. I reject my membership in this cult. And people started to wake up that, dude, this is a cult. This is a cult, man. And they saw everybody around them acting like freaking cult members. Not just cult members, because we're all always cult members. People were acting like obviously brainwashed cult members. You could present them with like, dude, have you looked at the statistics? Have you analyzed this? And they just could not think because they are brainwashed cult members. And part of their brainwashing is that they are not in a cult. Part of their brainwashing is that it is possible for a human being to not be in a cult. So you cannot be in a cult. And in fact, you are not in a cult. And there is no need for you to be responsible for that you are in a cult and be responsible for your cult membership because you're not in a cult. Because human beings cannot be in a cult, and this is not a cult. That's the brainwashing of that cult.
Yeah.
It's brainwashed people into secularism. You cannot be in a cult. Humans can be secular. Humans can exist without religious belief or cult membership. Not true. Deception.
Yeah.
Brainwashing.
Yeah. Deception. I think that's the word, deception. I don't know what I was gonna say, but you know, like this charismatic leaders.
Mhm.
You can actually see it during the pandemic, all of these charismatic leaders just like, you have to inject yourself with this, as otherwise you have no access to see your granny. Do it for this and do it for that. If you don't do it, you're a selfish little clod.
Dude, it was the full blown thing. It was like, anyway, I can generate those set of carrot and stick for any of the cults that I participate in, and I can understand them in any of those cults because I'm clear they're cults. Kṛṣṇa's a cult, Landmark's a cult, Bikram's a cult, Christianity's a cult. Like, they're all cults. It's all different cults. They're
Mini
all
cults, big cults.
They're all organizations. They're human. They are human organizations and groups. They have the structure and dynamics of human organizations and groups, and the humans who participate in them have the religious impulse, and the religious impulse must be answered in a human being. It's not possible for a human to be secular. You're always in a cult. And so people in Landmark, like the ones who are complaining, are the ones who used Landmark to answer the religious impulse. And so they took it as like the world-saving mission and went on missionary activities. I spent 3 years living in Peru, working around the clock, like complete, like there was no going home. I lived in the temple. There was no like, now I'm going to check out and go home. Landmark staff members at least have a house they could go to. I didn't have that. But I'm not going to complain about it because I voluntarily signed up for it, and I'm clear that it's a cult. And if you go on staff at Landmark, just be clear that you're in a cult. You're a human being. You have to be in a cult. Or you could treat it like a job and not as a cult, but you got to be powerful in your participation. You can say no to things, because, they'll tell you if you're a Hare Krishna that if you don't do this, things like, I don't know, people don't really use this one, you're going to go to hell. But no, they do. They're like, it's an aparad, it's an offense. For example, I'll give you an example. In 2008, I love this, man. I'm a cult member. Let me find this article that I wrote. It was on ISKCON News. It was in 2008, and it was about how that they should not annotate Srila Prabhupada's books, right? Now, if I go here, and it was GBC Resolution 311, sets a dangerous precedent, risky. Annotation sets a risky precedent. Add to the stage. Written in 2008. And here they wanted to annotate Prabhupada's books, right? They would do things like take out the word cult. If they could, they would take out "this is a cult" from the book to be able to integrate it with the global cult. No, this is not a cult. We're not a cult. This is not a cult. The only way you cannot be a cult is by joining this cult. So creating the power to annotate. Now, I said in here, who is to wield the power to annotate? I said this: the GBC, the governing body commission of ISKCON, is a demonstrably fallible body. It's recanted past positions and apologized for past decisions. And now they want to extend their constitutional power into the books. So this is not a statement that a cult member who does not know that they are a cult member can make. I know I'm a cult member. I know they are cult leaders. And so I can say that, right? Mm-hmm. I can say that you're a cult leader. This is a cult and you're not perfect and you made mistakes before and you're going to make mistakes in the future. When a person comes out of their why I left Hare Kṛṣṇa, why I left Landmark, they're like, you are demonstrably fallible. You have recanted your past position. You're apologizing for your past decisions. You're going to do the same thing because you just joined another cult. But now you're pretending that you're not a cult member. You didn't get it. You didn't get that. I was in a cult and I didn't know it. And it's like, brother, and now you're in a cult and you don't know it. You didn't get it. It is inevitable for human beings to be in a cult. You can't get away from it. You can only be responsible for how you participate in the cult. And when people are telling you that it's not a cult, they're lying. They either don't know or they're like straight up lying to you. It's a cult. The UN is a cult. The WEF is a cult. The World Health Organization is a cult. The Kṛṣṇa Consciousness Movement is a cult. Bikram Yoga is a cult. Landmark is a cult. Your local gym is a cult. It's all cults. Everything is a cult. And when you answer your religious impulse as a human being with your membership in a particular organization, that becomes you joining a cult. You don't have to join Landmark as a cult. You can go to the Hare Krishna restaurant and have a meal and not become a Krishna cult member. You can do a Landmark program and not become a Landmark cult member. You can go and do a Bikram yoga class and not become a Bikram cult member. How do you become a Bikram cult member? You just go there all the time. It's the only thing you do. And then you do the teacher training. You replace your mind with Bikram's mind and say exactly what Bikram was saying and start leading the classes, open your own gym and tell people that Bikram yoga is like literally the best and the only way to do yoga. Now you're a Bikram cult member. But if you go to a Bikram yoga class, it doesn't make you a cult member. Just like going to the Hare Krishna restaurant, eating some halava doesn't make you a Krishna cult member. It's when you're like, I really believe in this and this is the way to save the world, then you're a cult member. These climate change cult members, climate change is a cult belief and a cult membership. It's part of the global assert cult. This one right here, the growing communism, the clutches of the growing communist cult. It's assert. It's opposed to God. It's atheistic. It pretends that secularism is real and can be a thing. Okay, let's do some of the comments. Or do you want someone to say something after my cult rant?
I need to bring my glass. Yes. Don't mind me doing
Sure.
that?
Yeah.
Where's my glasses?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Shout out to Chris Copeland. Thanks for tuning in, mate. He says, mate, your camera looks great. Hey, I think all centralized authorities are going to collapse going forward. Hey, that's a good idea. It's like put a compliment at the beginning of your comment and then bam, drop in the knowledge. Centralized, yeah. Yep. Yeah, let me put up my counterspin argument. So counterspin interview. So I got interviewed by Counterspin magazine, and this is an interview that's been like 2 years coming. The Hare Krishnas of Freedom Village, an interview with Sitapati Das. Man, I read this and I'm like, this is so good, this interview. It's so good. I understand with Prabhupada is like, he reads his own books and is like, wow, I didn't really say this. I'm like, where did this stuff come from? It's because I'm a cult member and I've replaced my brains with the cult programming, and it's Krishna cult programming. And when I speak, it comes out. Dude, this is like Krishna cult. Like, if you read what I say in here, I'm just a brainwashed Krishna cult member. I'm not brainwashed though, because I know that I'm a Krishna cult member and it's deliberate and I'm responsible for it.
Were you being brainwashed of all the cults and
Yeah.
then injected this cult, which is basically universally beautiful?
Yeah, that's what Prabhupada said. He said brainwashing it is a bad thing, that we should wash your brain. Yes, their brains are dirty and we'll wash them. Yeah, so we know how this thing ends, Sitapati says. And it ends with the collapse of the overstretched systems of the world, social, economic, and political, under the weight of the compounding effects of their internal contradictions. That is so good. You know why that's so good? It's just a fact. Like Chris is saying here, all centralized authorities are going to collapse going forward. The other thing that I love about this is that, you know where I got this from? This particular languaging for this? It's from Chairman Mao. He wrote a paper in 1937 called On Contradiction, which is using Marxist and Engels' kind of analysis of the world about how the capitalist system collapses under its own internal contradictions. And then I applied it and then merged it with Krishna consciousness, spiritual communism. Yeah.
What's next?
Okay, what about the loners, truthers who hate authority and don't identify with, and groups? Have we created the most massive cult ever by accident? You see it happening. Like, people can't exist outside cults. They immediately join another cult.
Yeah.
There's the anti-vaxxer cult.
Oh, what's that? The loners called? All the people that are loners, they're sitting together.
Yeah.
Believing that are loners when actually they're not.
If we all individually reject all groups and all authority, then are we a group and a cult? Yes. Yeah. Every time they try to do like a dissolution, like a revolution, we're going to bring overthrow the system, another authoritarian system gets imposed. It's the same thing. It's a similar. These are manifestations of the same fundamental realities of the world. Mm-hmm. They overthrow one system, and then another authoritarian system immediately gets imposed. They had like anarcho-syndicalist. There was an anarcho-syndicalist revolution in France Anarcho-syndicalism. You know, like anarchy. We're going to be anarchists. We're going to have no leaders. It's like, show me the anarchist. Where is the actual anarchist? There's no, you can't have that. Because as soon as you have no leader, someone will immediately assert themselves as the leader. So anarcho-syndicalism can really just like dissolve the existing thing. It's a precursor to the imposition of something else. Maybe it was in Spain where they had the anarcho-syndicalism.
I don't think that will exist anyways, because everyone wants to be a leader. And imagine like everyone like doing their own ideas and bringing their own ideas, and like there is no harmony.
Yeah. So this was my thing with the communist, the socialist, you know, movement on campus when I was in university. They were explaining it to me, and they said, and then, you know, after we have this socialist kind of state, you know, like what all of these states are devolving into across the world, we don't have democracy anymore. We have socialism everywhere. And your choices are between the far right, you know, the neo-Nazis, the National Socialists, or the left, the International Socialists, you know. And you got, you know, socialism super rapid here in New Zealand, Labour, or socialism a little bit less rapid, National. Those are your two choices. Massively overtaxed state intervention. You're not responsible for anything. It's a cult. It's a cult that's taking control of the government, as in indoctrinating the children. It's like complete authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
Pretending that it's not a cult. It's a cult. But they were saying to me that after we have this authoritarian cult of socialism, then we dissolve that, and then we have this utopian communism where nobody's in charge, you know, and everything just, and I'm like, well, I can't wait for that to happen, because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to seize control of that. They're like, you know, we use the state military and the state police force to bring about the socialist revolution, and then, you know, we dissolve all of that. And I'm like, are you saying you're going to have a state with no military and no police force? I'm like, dude, I'm going to become a dictator and take that over within minutes. And if I'm going to do it, there must be millions of other people who are too. Your idea is a pipe dream. It's a fantasy. So there was like, anyway, I can't find it. It was in France or Spain. They had.
I just don't understand how some human beings can have this like
Naivety?
Naivety of thinking like all human beings are going to be without a leader and everybody else does whatever they want. It's like, you know what? It doesn't work. It never did. It will never do.
No.
What make you think a human being is just going to be like all peaceful and, you know, doing nothing? Everybody is just like finding a reason in life, a meaning in life, and everybody else does nothing about it. Like, it doesn't make sense.
If you want the evidence for that, you need look no further than Buddhist temples in Thailand. You have a Buddhist temple, or any temple or anything. If you've ever lived in an ashram, hierarchy is just natural, and, you know, and then you have these temples, these Buddhist temples where people are fighting inside the temple. You have a look at what happened to the Gaudiya Mutt, their mission. They're fighting over the properties. They're fighting in the temple over the rooms. You know, then the temples are fighting against each other. It's like not even in the society of Paramahamsas, you know, the supposedly renounced, spiritually, materially detached. What to speak of the materially attached competing for resources?
Even there was like Paramahamsa, you know, they are leaders. And people underneath, they look to that Paramahansa to follow the footstep of that person.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such a thing as the world doesn't, you know, the world is going to work in an environment where it's no leaders. It's just like not. What we need to have is like a leaders that actually have the well-being in mind of the people.
So what's happening at the moment, I'm going to have to bring that screen window back. Window, this one. So under the guise of like climate change, racial inequity, blah, 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 all the things, you know, the refugee crisis because of war and the climate change, it's growing communism, and they're imposing socialist states on these countries. And then their idea is they're going to have this global communist utopia. And Srila Prabhupada just nailed it all the way back there. And even communism itself. So the first level of marketing, of deception, is the idea of secularism. A human being can exist without answering the religious impulse. A human being can exist without a religion. And then you just invent another religion that you say is not a religion and have everyone believe that. Human beings can exist not being in a cult. And then you just create the biggest cult that has the most people in it and call everything else a cult. and tell these people you're not in a cult, so they never realize that they're in a cult.
I guess, like the thing about this cult thing is like they relate it with God. Anything to do without God is not a cult.
Yeah.
When in fact,
yeah,
it may not have God as the main point, as the leader, as the person you want to worship, but you have something else that you are following and worshiping, and you're not aware of that.
Yeah. So what they do is they create the secularism as the first level of brainwashing. Then the next level of brainwashing is they get people to believe in these things like climate change and that, and then they create like, we're heading towards this utopia and we have to solve these problems, right? There's the carrot and the stick. And then the next level is the socialism. Then there's the communist utopia at the end, but it's all deception. And they say that they're atheistic, but when you actually analyze them, these people are practicing religious occult rituals to Satan,
Belief system.
to the devil. They worship Saturn. They have this black cube. They are a full-blown religious cult. And they've just brainwashed their members in the opening thing into thinking that it's secular. You can be secular. And the way they have them brainwashed that they're not in a cult is by telling them that it's possible to not be in a cult. So they can never be responsible for their cult membership. And that they can call anything else a cult. And then, oh, that's a cult, but this is not a cult. If you don't want to be in a cult, you can join this cult. It's a satanic cult. Occult rituals, occult leaders, getting the members to take the Kool-Aid. And there was one other thing about it, which I can't remember. Anyway.
Yeah. And I guess, it's just being aware of like every day you're doing a ritual. Every single day.
People just like to feel their religion isn't a cult. Christianity was a Jewish cult. Islam was an Arab pagan cult. Yeah. And so my point here is people just like to feel their religion isn't a cult. Why? Because they are brainwashed. They've been brainwashed. It's a psychological operation. The meaning of the word cult has changed. The meaning of the word cult has not changed since Srila Prabhupada used it. What Prabhupada means when he says this is exactly what he says. But what you think when you read it and you hear it has been brainwashed. People don't like to feel their religion isn't a cult, just like people don't want to hear that their thing is a conspiracy theory. But it literally is a theory about the collaboration hidden of two or more people to advance their interests. It's a conspiracy theory. What's wrong with that? Conspiracies and theories about conspiracies are like a natural part of life. And they're necessary. Conspiracies are a natural part of life.
You always have to have an opposing thought about things.
Well, it's not necessarily that it's an opposing thought. It's just it's an analysis of an organization and a group.
Yeah, opposing thought. Okay. So could be opposing thought. Could be an analysis. Could be an assessment of things. Because every single human being has the capacity. They have the intelligence, and how they use the intelligence is a different story. But every single human being have the intelligence to think, to analyze, to discern, and to make decisions according to that. It doesn't mean that assertions, their conclusions, or their assessments, it's right in the whole sense of the world. For them, it is right.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is the conclusion they got according to where they are in life.
So the brainwashing that they've done is they've crippled the humans by making it impossible for you to consider and analyze conspiracies and to talk about them.
Exactly.
And also to make it impossible for you to distinguish that you're a cult member.
Yeah. Now, what this bigger cult did, like the atheism and the sectarianism or whatever this secularism or the whole COVID thing or whatever, all of these people behind this, they know that the human beings, if they think outside the box, they are going to be little. Most of the people are mostly like, just like it's not like an insult, but I don't know any other word to find it. Just like going without stopping and thinking, what am I doing? Why, assessing, discerning, and doing things for themselves without having the influence of that. Rather, they're influencing with all of this so the human beings can have like, oh, this is way more, attractive to me, so I'm going to go with this, and that becomes my religious practice every day, you know. They know how to entertain, they know how to enclose the human beings, they know how to catch that.
Mhm.
And how they doing it now, they're doing from the childhood, from the little ones, indoctrination.
Yeah, well, they always have been, but it's
Always
now
have
becoming obvious.
Now it's way more like, you know, these days obviously there are human beings that are very powerful. Basically they're not just like any human beings, but their way of thinking, their way of analyzing things are way more powerful, and they're way more aware of what's going on. Their awareness is higher than any other human beings. And the human beings that are just basically going and getting themselves into whatever without thinking and, you know, as analyzing and assessing and all of that, and getting themselves in that awareness, the choice that I'm making right now, it's correct, and it may not be correct in 1 year or 2 years, you know. But they're just like, what I'm doing is just correct, and the tunnel vision, like, this is just what it is. So they know that. Therefore, they know how to dominate these kind of people. And now what they do to dominate more and easier: television, programs, sport, entertaining, pornography,
Space,
the moon landing. What else? What other entertainment? Oh, you know, the Hollywood people. Put it all this woman. Now, woman in the Hollywood just basically coming out naked. And the man who is the sexiest man in the world. So all of this entertainment is basically capturing the human beings. So what they do, they're more acting in the sense of like the senses rather than intelligence. And we know in the Kṛṣṇa consciousness, what Srila Prabhupada brought to this Western world is, you know, the soul is here, the intelligence is here, the mind is here, and the senses are here. So this is the power of every human being. But what's going on these days is the inverse now. The senses are basically taking over all of that, and everything else of the soul is basically, you know, what you call pushed down or hidden, or I don't know, a word like undermining it. So that's why they know how to do all of those things. Therefore, human beings are basically trapped in here when it should be the other way around. And they don't want human beings to be in the other way around, because they will not have any control of human beings. They will not have power to, you know, to control, power to dominate the world, power to have all that money they want to have. They don't know. They wouldn't.
So the inversion, it takes place because, you see, that hierarchy is not simply the senses, the mind, the intelligence, and then the soul. And then above that is the super soul.
The super soul, yeah.
Once they see what they've done, the ability to do that inversion is by getting rid of the super soul, God. So what they've done is the secularism and the atheism is the first step. And so when they first introduced this idea of secularism, atheism, a human being can exist without an answer to the religious impulse. You cannot be religious, you can be an atheist. At that point, when that gets introduced into human society, people are still like they're still sense controlled, they're still acting according to duty. Once they introduce that and cut the soul from the super soul, boom, it just goes.
Exactly. So what they doing these days is, instead of like making human beings closer to God, which is the super soul, and the soul, which we have all of that, that's why we are alive and we're talking, they're eliminating these two things, the most important things that are of a human being: the super soul, the creator, and the soul, who you are as a person, the spirit soul. They're eliminating all of that. Therefore, they put it the other way around.
Yeah.
So they can be the God.
And you know, the madness of it is that it's like transgenderism, for example. You are the body, just not this one. Like, and then you're going to surgically like mutilate your body to try to turn it into another one. And that's called self-realization. It's a complete inversion. Like, instead of you are the soul, you are the spiritual entity, the life force within the body, you are the body. And your self-realization means like trying to change the body into something. So people literally, you know, trying to turn themselves into cats and, you know, sharpen their teeth, cut their tongue in half, all this kind of thing. That's self-realization in that model. It's complete madness.
According to them, because you know what? That is how they can have a control of human beings.
Mhm.
By making you believe that God doesn't exist, that you are just like a bunch of chemicals with a flesh here and there and a hair and two eyes blinking and a mouth that opens, and you can do whatever you want with your body, you know?
And you can do whatever you want because it doesn't matter because you're going to die and then that's the end of everything.
That's the end of it. And you know what?
Nothing's real.
You can change your sex and you can have your sexual orientation 10 times different and whatever. But what is happening with souls, even when they do all of those experiments on or assaults to their body and to their own mind, their soul is basically screaming because they cannot find that what they're looking for. And that's why they are hidden, they're demonizing God and the soul.
Well, that's why mental health issues are on the rise.
Yeah, because
Massively.
the mental health issue that people that don't connect them to themselves is that your spirit soul, and the super soul is basically the master who has created you the way and beautiful the way you are. And how are you going to find this meaning in life and purpose in life is when you connected to who you are, who created you and who you really are. And that disconnection is by mental health issues, suicide issues, so many things going on.
Facts.
Anyways.
Okay, let's go through a few comments and wrap it up. Bhakti Mark, shout out, everyone is in some kind of cult, whether they know it or admit it. Yep, and the ones who don't know it are brainwashed. So if you don't know that you're in a cult and you don't know what cult or cults you're in, you're brainwashed. Shout outs to Jackie Fisher Bailey, enjoying the conversation. Truth Rising TV, Cabal NATO is going to stimulate a religious experience involving angels using blue beam and by stimulating the pineal gland with certain waveforms. Love it. Nikendra Das, Buddhist monks were slaughtering villages in Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, about 10 years ago. Andy Frankel, some cults are more dangerous than others. Paul Seals, what about Fauci's COVID cult? Yeah, we talked about that. That was when many people woke up to the fact that they were in a cult. They were low-level members in a global satanic cult, and they rejected their membership. You know, charismatic leaders, high control, and then everybody else around you turning into zombies and being like, and you're like, dude, what is happening here? Hang on, what? And it's like, dude, these guys are brainwashed cult members. It became obvious.
About Chaitanya?
Yeah. Here we go. This is the final comment here. The cult of Chaitanya is the most dangerous because, as Prabhupada explains, it's creating some who are independently thoughtful. It's a fact. Good morning, Sam from Western Australia.
Hare Krishna.
Mr. Showboat. Yeah. The branch chain Covidians.
It's quite unfortunate. So, yeah, time to wake up. And powerfully select which culture,
Which cult? Yeah, man,
which
own
cult
it.
you're going to be.
And own it.
Take responsibility for it. Don't just like look back like, oh, the Hare Krishnas make me work really hard and I have no blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Like
you chose that, man.
And great.
You joined the cult. No one kidnapped you, man. I was brainwashed. You were brainwashed into thinking that it wasn't a cult. That you could not be in a cult. Sorry,
and you know what?
You.
And yeah, so like I guess it's becoming more self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
Like the decisions that even with the thoughts, you know, the way you think, be aware of the thoughts that constantly come into your mind. To you. Yeah. The mind is bringing you all the thoughts. And, you know, like there was a way they explain it. Yeah. The mind is the subtle body and the office is here in your brain. So people think like the brain is the most important part of the, of the body. Yeah. It's the office of the mind. You know, the whole wiring thing. And make a choice, because everything, even the thoughts that you constantly thinking or bring into your awareness is basically a choice. You know, for example, you may be thinking about like a Hollywood girl, and you're constantly thinking about like the form or whatever.
By the way,
it's a choice.
That Hollywood girl is probably a biological male. Yeah, it's a fact, you know? It's a fact. And this cult, for some reason, is into this transgenderism. And for many years, they've been putting people up in front of you who are biologically male, but they're saying that it's a female. And they I don't know exactly what the agenda thing there is, but you know how it's becoming like way more widespread now? They first got it in there. Deception.
Well, you know what is the agenda of this? They want to eliminate the family.
It seems like they want to eliminate biological humans. Tucker Carlson says that it's anti-human. In 2020, and as I did an analysis of everything, I was like, this thing must be non-human because it seems to contradict even from, because I can take on the Darwinian evolution, you know, as a theory. And I'm like, if I analyze this from the idea of reproduction, survival, the imperative of the, you know, genetic organism is to reproduce, this is acting against the interests of the genetic survival of the human species. So it has the characteristics of something non-human, imposing itself on humanity.
Well, that's Kali Yuga, isn't it? Because, you know, like when we're talking about all of this gender thing and elimination of the family culture, or you know, God himself created family.
Mm-hmm.
And what Kali Yuga or the demons or whatever people may know these days, or the Satanism or whatever, the Suras, we know in Krishna consciousness, they want to eliminate everything that God has created.
They're envious of the super soul within their own body.
So envious. So you need to be aware of this. Anything that you're doing, anything that you're getting yourself into, just, you know, analyze this. Because what the Satanism or the Asuras want, what they want is destroy everything that God has created. Everything. Family, religion, your own thought, individual thought, and all of that.
Let's end with this. Let's end with the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Divine and demoniac nature. So this is an actual description of the two. There are basically two cults that human beings can belong to.
Yeah.
So here's the first one. The Blessed Lord said, fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity and simplicity, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion and freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty and steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, freedom from envy and the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, O son of Bharata, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. Arrogance, pride, anger, conceit, harshness, and ignorance, these qualities belong to those of demonic nature, O son of Prita. The transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demonic qualities make for bondage. Do not worry, O son of Pandu, for you are born with the divine qualities. O son of Prita, in this world there are two kinds of created beings. One is called the divine and the other demonic. I have already explained to you at length the divine qualities. Now hear from me of the demoniac. Those who are demoniac do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness nor proper behavior nor truth is found in them. They'll tell you that it's not a cult, when in fact it is. They say that this world is unreal, that there is no foundation, and that there is no God in control. It is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Following such conclusions, the demoniac, who are lost to themselves and who have no intelligence, engage in unbeneficial, horrible works meant to destroy the world.
There we are. That's exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah. The demoniac, taking shelter of insatiable lust, pride, and false prestige, and being thus illusioned, are always sworn to unclean work, attracted by the impermanent. They believe that to gratify the senses unto the end of life is the prime necessity of human civilization. Thus there is no end to their anxiety. Being bound by hundreds and thousands of desires, by lust and anger, they secure money by illegal means for sense gratification. The demoniac person thinks, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. He is my enemy, and I have killed him, and my other enemy will also be killed. I am the Lord of everything. I am the enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man, surrounded by aristocratic relatives. WEF much? There is none so powerful and happy as I am. I shall perform sacrifices. I shall give some charity, and thus I shall rejoice. In this way, such persons are deluded by ignorance. Thus perplexed by various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions, one becomes too strongly attached to sense enjoyment and falls down into hell. Self-complacent and always impudent, deluded by wealth and false prestige, they sometimes perform sacrifices in name only without following any rules or regulations. Here it is here. This is the verse. Bewildered by false ego, strength, pride, lust, and anger, the demon becomes envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in his own body and in the bodies of others, and blasphemes against the real religion. So this is why this attack on people's bodies, like forcing them to inject things into themselves, getting children to be surgically mutilated and inject hormones, disrupting their hormonal system. It's this. They're envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, situated in their own bodies and in the bodies of others. People are possessed by demons. They're demonic. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, are cast by me into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. So there you go. It is inevitable for human beings to be in a cult. Inevitable means it cannot be avoided. When a human being is that they are not in a cult, they are simply not being responsible for that they are in a cult. The largest dominant cult on the planet right now has brainwashed its participants into believing that a human being cannot be in a cult. And it's done that to make it impossible for them to be responsible for their participation in the cult. Part of the side effect of that is that there are many other cults other than the global dominant cult that are subsidiary ones, competitors, exist within the context of that cult, and it becomes impossible for a human being who has been brainwashed into the global cult to believing that they can exist non-occult to be responsible for their participation. Landmark, ISKCON, Bikram, whatever the cult is, it's a cult. Human beings can't exist non-occult. There's nothing wrong with being a cult. It's just a natural organizing structure for human beings. When you can understand that you are a human and you belong to a cult or a number of cults, you can be responsible for your participation in that cult, how you participate. Alexander belongs to, sarcastically, the COVID cult. Lord Fauci is my leader, he says. And you're only a brainwashed cult member when you are that you're not in a cult. When you can be flat, when you can be responsible for that. Yeah, it's a cult, and this is how I'm participating in this cult. Then you can bring your independence, your individuality, your self-expression, your free thought, your conscience to the cult. Otherwise, if you are that you are not in a cult, neither you have a conscience nor the cult can have a conscience. People who think that they discovered that they're in a cult and have left the cult have simply joined another cult that they're now not being responsible for belonging to. The way to get out of the trap when you realize that you're in a cult is to realize that you're always in a cult and start being responsible for your participation in the cult. That is my thesis.
Yeah, and the choices that you make.
Yeah.
Everything is a choice, believe it or not.
Thanks for tuning in. Look forward to continuing this conversation. How to powerfully participate in a cult. Param Vijayate, Sri Kṛṣṇa, Sankirtanam. Let's roll the outro.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Okay.
Okay. Take 4.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama,